The member for Traeger.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. Rise to close off the debate for the Working with Children legislation, Indigenous Communities Amendment Bill 2021. Thank all honourable members for their contribution to this bill, I appreciate the demeanour shown by a lot of the speakers and the attitude, which was very complimentary to the efforts we've made jointly as a party towards this initiative. So I acknowledge that. Thank the Legal Affairs Safety Committee for their efforts, but one thing I wouldn't thank them for was their neglect to visit more of our First Australian communities. I really was hoping that this time with the bill there'd be a good tour of the Cape York. It's a place I don't get to very often, and I'm sure not many of us do. And there's more Aboriginal communities up there than I've got in my electorate. And I think that just would have given a really deep insight to the impact of this. And so just going to Palm Island, Mount Isa, Yarrabah, you're just not covering. This doesn't do it justice at all, and that was very disappointing, I must say, from the outset. I'd like to thank everyone who's had the courage, I guess, to talk to someone outside of government. That becomes a rarer thing these days. People get scared to talk to you if you're not part of government and the community groups, but they rose above that and expressed their opinions and views despite that. I'll just go through those. I want to make mention of them. Wanyi Tribal PBC, Felix Dumaji there, Concurry Justice Association, North Queensland Indigenous Catholic Social Services, led by famous Father Mick in Mount Isa, Selectability in Mount Isa, Palm Island Community Company, the Palm Island Community Justice Group, the Mayor of Palm Island, Ms Lam Sam, Yarrabah Leaders Forum, Yarrabah Aboriginal Shire Council, the North Queensland Regional Language Aboriginal Council, the Mayor of Mornington Island, Cole Yanna, Dumaji Community Justice Group, Mayor of Dumaji Jason Ned and other members of the Dumaji Council, Junkuri Laka, Wellesley Island Aboriginal Law Justice and Governance Association, Calvin Page and Grant Garvey, which is not an exhaustive list by any means. This is the third time I've introduced this bill, or at least a bill of this form based on this principle, and it's in the spirit of the growing sentiment around our state and nation to advance the interests of our First Australians. I think all in this House would strongly agree on, and rectify their on average abysmal socio-economic conditions, their incarceration rates, their welfare dependency, the violence that is rife in the homes and the communities, and the poor health outcomes, life expectancies, and I expected much better from this debate. We owe these people a hell of a lot more. Let me remind you of one of the communities in the bill I refer to a lot, Dumaji, one that I'm more familiar with. They're currently experiencing the impact of these floods, and so there's this is a lot exacerbated a lot of these issues right now. It's a town of about 1,000 people. A town of about 1,000 people. About 90% or higher identify as First Australians. The unemployment in Dumaji hovers around 20%. The average household income is $63,000 versus $87,000 for the state. It costs about $600 for a fortnightly trip to the supermarket. What's it cost you? It cost me about $200 or $300. It cost them $600. Try living in that community. The average life expectancy is 49. The crime rate is about 10 times that of Brisbane. And domestic violence breach occurs every day. A person is assaulted almost every day. A home is broken into every 3 days. And of course, they're the crimes that the police. That's just the crimes the police know about. Unfortunately, there's a lot that we don't know about that goes on inside the homes, unreported. Life in Dumaji is not that easy, and despite that hardship, hope still exists. Quite surprisingly, hope with these people still exists. Well, the members who spoke in the bill have provided input into the committee report, have empathised with the bill and its intent, and I said I appreciate that. None of them acknowledged this hope, and none of them have risen to the challenge of what was asked of them by the Palm Island Mayor, Ms Lam Sam, who said, in powerful words, I'll quote them, I think one thing I will say from the get-go is this community needs a brave state government. Our welfare snowball continues to grow by the day. Every year we have 50 funerals. There are probably 2 weeks in that calendar year where we do not have a funeral on the island. I have one of the busiest cemeteries and busiest airports. Do you see the correlation? All the people are flying in and out of my community because locals cannot hold down simple local jobs because they cannot access a blue card. Or I'll put in the words of Kyle Yanna, Mayor of Mornington Island, someone who struggled to get his blue card and became the mayor. Blue card, so his community's voted for him to be their mayor, but he can't get the blue card. He's got it now. The blue card has failed us. Like most other systems in communities, they are not fit for purpose in our communities. At the end of the day, not fit for purpose in our communities. At the end of the day, not just individuals but the whole community loses. We also lose. We sometimes get employees, young families from cities like Brisbane or Cairns who want to come out and work here, who want to come in and help us, who want to come make a difference and help to change the struggles that we face, but we lose them mainly because our preschool is normally understaffed. It is not running efficiently because our mob can't get blue cards to work in this place. It's hard to get family-orientated people around across to the island to work in the preschool also. Not only do we lose with that, we have young families who lose also. They want to get ahead, they want to build a better life, but they cannot because our blue card system restrains our mob from being able to work there to cater for their families, to have young families. And finally, I'll refer to the words of the Mayor of Yarrabah, Ross Andrews. For us, the blue card issue is important in terms of a lot of the big reforms that are happening around First Nations people, particularly the voice to Parliament, the path to treaty, closing the gap, health equity and a few others. But at the state and national level where First Nations people have to come have a voice consistent with fellow Australians. For us, this issue is important in terms of economic engagement and participation. Like the member for Hinchinbrook said, having that economic participation, that opportunity like the rest of us. Blue cards play a part in that, as well as in terms of getting our people off welfare and engaging in the real economy. There are challenges within the rules of government and how they play out, but there are also opportunities for our people to move forward on many of our challenges. These are just three voices from those communities that the bill would apply, and they're genuine voices who have asked to see this bill time and time again, and they're seeing it thirdly and they'll see it knocked back again and at this stage. We'll be left back at square one when this bill fails tonight. Madam Acting Speaker, this bill, it's not my bill. There's been criticism directed towards me in this House before saying, you don't have all the answers. Well, I don't. I know I don't have the answers. That's why I go out there to ask people how do we fix these things. And, you know, part of why this is here, because it was one of the initial calls there was Department of Education in Mount Isa saying, Rob, can you fix the blue card bill? As soon as we get someone good in Doomadgee, we've got to put them off. You need something that's fit for purpose. And so we didn't make this up. This came from the community. This is the voice coming out from those Aboriginal communities. This is not my idea. So you're not really criticising me when you say you don't have all the good ideas. But and I can't see a better demonstration of how you give the voice to our first Australian people. This is about saying perhaps we're not always, with our rigid guidelines, in the best position to make a good judgment call on whether that person is fit for that job in that community. It's paternalistic to say the least. And the argument keeps there's a trapdoor for a lot of speakers on this bill that's saying we can't see a deterioration of the standards of this rule set. Well, so you must be accepting then that the rules that would be applied by the local justice groups, by the locals, would be of a lesser standard that we would apply. So you're saying they would care less about the safety of their kids than we would. That you must, because that's what this bill is saying. And you could make criticism and say, well, local justice groups, they don't have the support. Well, you've got to pick someone. And there was plenty of time for amendments. You could have picked the council, you could have picked other groups, but no one came up with any of those suggestions. We've just sat here and criticised the KAP bill and said nice things about it, but saying, no, but it just won't work. Well, give me something that does work, because there's some pretty big problems out there to fix. I don't know how to fix all of them, but here was a blaringly obvious one that's been sitting there for 10 years, and it's pretty frustrating when the same thing comes 100 times to your office and you're saying, well, surely we can make this a bit better. And it does come with risk. Of course it does. Everything we do here comes with risk. The only way to remove the risk is to remove everyone out of the community, or every kid out of the community. You'll never remove that risk. And guess what? A lot of these offences happen despite having the blue card. Waving it around the school or the hospital is not stopping some of the horrible things at the home. And you know, as Bravehearts has said, 95 or 90% of what's happening there is happening in the home. So, I mean, you know, outside the kinship carer, that most of this becomes irrelevant, this debate. But you keep defaulting to saying we must keep, you know, child safety is sacrosanct. Who's going to disagree with that? Of course it is. But you've got to make it a call at some point. What is the cost on the other side of this debate? Because you can let these adults dwell in misery with no hope of getting a job, just so you can sit back and say, but at least the kids are safe, which I don't even think is a very valid point. So, you know, it is very hard for me to reconcile this momentum built up by the government of saying the voice and treaty, and these are the pathways and we need to close the gap, when I couldn't give a better working example of an issue that's sitting there to close the gap right now, to assist with that, and everyone's walking away with it. And again, there's no amendments here from the government. There's nothing here to say, oh, well, let's look at the ochre card in the Territory. That seems to be working okay. Let's have a look at that. All we've got is criticism that, oh, it's got flaws in the bill. Maybe it does, but give me something that works then. You've got a lot of staff there to work their stuff out, a lot of smart people. And if we all care about it as much, I'm sure I don't have the mortgage on compassion here for these communities. I'm sure you all care just as much as me. But if you do, crikey, we have to do something here. And there should be a sense of urgency. And if there isn't, my goodness me, you're in the wrong job, because this is a big issue, a big problem. And they're pretty serious stories we've heard in this House. They're pretty serious stories that I'm not going to share all those with you tonight. Some of them have come up already in some of the speeches. But the option of doing nothing here, and what I might add is throwing more money at it to say, oh, let's just get people to help them a bit more with applications. If you're saying that, you're completely removed from the process. That is a completely unrealistic practical solution. It helps. Of course it helps. But that is so far from resolving this issue, it's not funny. And it really says to me, you have not lived or worked enough with this issue. So I'll go through two case notes, because everyone sort of defaults to blue card, and I think a lot of members of the public say, well, that's letting pedophiles get near kids. And what we lose sight of, and it came up in, I think a speech from the government member before, but a lot of these offences, I mean, take Mornington Island, had alcohol bans for like 8 or 10 years, and the magistrates were just clogged up with homebrew offences, which ironically was the thing that disqualified you from getting your blue card. So, you'd say, well, that person can't get the... and the irony is in the fact that I've heard, and now, several times in this debate again, that you can't have two sets of rules. Well, you already applied two sets of rules. You had alcohol bans. Like, there's multiple examples, and there's a member from Hinchinbrook said child safety. We had legislation in here that applied a separate standard for a first Australian family. If the child was from a dysfunctional family, they'd extend the time that they could remain in the care of a household. So you're already recognising that there's some differences here and nuances associated with different communities, and you've changed the rules accordingly. But here, you've defaulted back to that standard argument, which is a safe space saying we can't have two sets of rules. That's nonsense. You've done it a lot, and that's just a silly argument to bring up. So I'll go back to a few examples, and this is just a small, sample size of what I experience every time, and I've got permission off these people to bring it up. But the local mayor rang me from Normanton, the cultural support officer at the Gulf Christian College, declined a blue card. I rang the minister's office, who were very helpful down here. The roller man he'd held that role successfully for many years without an issue. It was devastating for him. He'd picked himself up off a pretty low base, and for personal reasons, and anyway, he was in the local school. The principal, staff loved having him around. Daniel, his name was, and appreciated the work that he did. 6 months passed after, again, good help from the minister's office, who were really trying. The mayor, Jack Bowden, was so invested in trying to help this bloke. But he did receive his blue card, and that's, we say, oh, we're going to help him get it fast. He got it 6 to 12 months, but the principal got sick of doing all the entire workload. Well, he couldn't hold on. They had to employ someone else. So Daniel loses, Normanton loses. We all get to feel safe because we didn't amend any amendments to the blue card. But we can avoid things like this. Calvin Page in Doomadgee, he came. He was so lost. He didn't know I was onto this issue already. But he came and saw me. He said, "I just can't work it out. I'm trying to work here in Doomadgee." They're a big family, and Mount Isa, the Pages. Marjad Page is a well-respected doctor up there from the same family. But he was denied a blue card. The reasons weren't well explained to him. It was minor offending that he'd gone to court for before, and was due to receive a community service order. He was, and he'd agreed to do the community services. He worked out of town quite often. And after a number of internal appeals, he never got his blue card. He was unable to stay. We lost Calvin Page. He was pleading for help. Another one, this is an interesting one, and I should add, I should qualify, this lady was in Charters Towers, so it's, that my bill wouldn't apply to Charters Towers, but I think it still speaks to the principle that we're trying to address. It's an Indigenous lady in Charters Towers. Lost her job being rejected for a blue card. She'd previously been working for 18 months at a local school as an Indigenous support officer for kids. She admitted she had fines and court appearances in the past. Most were non-conviction dated. There were drug and assault charges. She'd attempted to appeal the decision through KAP, was told she had to wait for 2 years to apply. The schools wanted it. Everyone was happy with the job she was doing. She had successfully raised 2 of her own children and is now the legal care of a niece. She said the blue card process made her feel constantly attacked, so she threw in the towel. She said her life has gone down the hill since she lost her job at the school, is now suffering mentally and emotionally. And that's probably putting a nice bent on it. And multiply that by hundreds of stories. Of course, I don't hear all the stories. I'm giving you a small sample size of what I encounter. I saw selectability was one of the contributors to the bill because they're an employer up there. And my usual conversation, standard conversation with any health providers, child safety workers, youth workers is you're going to have a problem. You're not going to be able to engage the families because most of the people who have lived experience, who are really good with working these kids, won't be able to get the job, and you won't be able to give them the job, mainly because of the blue card. Not only because of the blue card, mainly. So until we solve the blue card, you try. And the lady from Selectability, who, not knowing it had this bill in Parliament, said, "Can you do something? It's crazy. We're trying to employ these people in Doomadgee, Mornington. We can't get anyone. We can't do our job properly." And I thought, well, no kidding. Here's the number for the committee. Ring them and give your submission. Tell them I've heard it enough. And so it's just story after story of misery. And yes, there is risk with any solution you give to these things, and no solution would be perfect. As we find out now, the blue card was done with the best intention, probably a good idea, but we're learning now perhaps it's got some flaws. Perhaps it's done more inadvertent damage than we set out to address in the first place. And I'll drill down on that because that's a really important concept I truly believe in. If mum and dad in Doomadgee right now have missed out on that job, that barrier is too high. You can put more money into help them fill out the forms or whatever. But at that point where they decide I'm going to engage, I'm going to advance myself and join the modern economy, I'm going to get a job. At that point, that's a really important time in their life. They're ready to turn around. You've got to have a job ready to put them into place within the week. Get them in place, support them. The first comment they get is, "Crikey, we're having a problem with your blue card." Don't worry though, we'll appeal it, and it might take 6 to 12 months, but just hang around, stay off the grog. And what's inevitably happening, a lot of these people are slipping back into that place, that dark place, and the kids who we're trying to protect in the first place are at greater risk because mum and dad are still subject to these barriers where meaningful work is their salvation. Meaningful work is it is the one common denominator with just about every conversation I have with people appealing for help up there is, why haven't we got the jobs? How come Save the Children got the jobs here? why is that all these out-of-town people got jobs? Like Ms Lam Sam said, we've got the airport problem, everyone flying into the jobs because the locals can't get the jobs. Now, if anyone else has a better solution here, please share it now, because this is not something to kick where we kick the can down the road and say, look, we'll get to it. The problem is there right now. There's people dying. That we heard this terribly distressing story of the girl from Mornington Island. I'm sure there wasn't a person who listened to that in this House, particularly when it was delivered at the, in the committee hearing. If you weren't but moved to tears, you know, the anguish this is causing through, and it is the height of bureaucracy, well-intentioned bureaucracy, getting in the road of the right outcomes. We've got to apply. Doesn't matter if you're First Australian, non-Indigenous, whatever. I mean, this really, the principle of this should expand beyond the Aboriginal communities. Like there should be some autonomy given beyond, you know, a tick the box authority here in Brisbane that allocates these blue cards, and it must be, because it cannot operate like this, and it's most acute in these Aboriginal communities. Schooling. Ms Lam Sam Parliament brought up, he said, how are we supposed to encourage kids to go to school? Like, if mum and dad have had one or two chops at getting a job and it's like, don't worry about that, then white fellas won't give you the job because you can't get a blue card. Well, now, they've had that conversation 5 or 10 years now. You've built a whole generation of kids going, well, why would you bother? Like, why do you bother going to school? Because, and there must be a direct correlation with that. One of the, you know, at my own political peril, people come in my office to me and I say, what are you doing about youth crime? And I said, well, you know what, the biggest thing I think I'm doing is blue cards. Because the reason the kids are running around the street in Mount Isa is because it's a dysfunctional family. How do we clean it? What's the problem with the family unit? Well, invariably, mum and dad haven't got a job. And you go, well, what's the problem with the job? And you know, it's not the only reason, but one of the biggest things you'll always find, again, one big common denominator is blue cards. They're struggling, and these are exactly the people we're trying to help, the ones you want to get off, pull up and trying to have a go. And the first thing we give them is a barrier. We must change that. And if every time we hit that point where you think, as Ms Lam Sam said, well, you've got to be brave and back these people, because that's what it takes. That's the whole thing of the voice. If you want the voice, you've got to back these people's judgment call. Back it or don't say it at all. It means nothing. And there is risk associated with that. That's risk. There's risk for the justice groups making these calls themselves. They could fall victim to one of the family groups in town that doesn't like the outcome of the decision. That's true. But we all deal with this as a mature society, and you know, everyone's going to have to deal with it at some point. But you have to come back to the point that we want to try and bring these people forward. Do we want to remove these barriers to the jobs? Because the jobs, meaningful work, will be their salvation. If you want to fix youth crime, fix the families. If you want to fix the families, get them into jobs. Get them into jobs. They don't want money. I don't take you to job and say, hey, give me more handouts, give me more money. They won't say that. They'll say, how come the white fella's got the job? How come we haven't got that here? The why, most of the time, is blue cards. And here we are tonight with an opportunity to fix that. Now, again, we don't have all the answers. We're not the smartest guys in the room, but we've got something. And I'm going to guess there's no amendments coming. There's no alternates. There's not going to be no announcements from the government tomorrow saying we're overhauling the system. There may be we're going to add some more, you know, cultural awareness officers in Doomadgee to help with the processing or something. Probably forget it, because it's hard enough trying to get people out there now to engage in those spaces. It might help a bit. I probably shouldn't say forget it, but it breaks your heart when we need a really big change. We need a government to be bold to back these people, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Yeah, I started sharing this story in my original contribution, but it was brought up before, the ridiculous impact of the blue cards, which doesn't really relate to the bill, but it does explain the point, is the rural fireys. We had 400 leave the service of rural fireys because of blue cards. Do you need any better evidence? Now, I don't think they were like abusers, and I bet you 90% of them were saying, well, you know what, stuff that. If you're going to make me get a blue card, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to run around chasing kids while I'm fighting fires. Yeah, that exactly good. I'll take that response from the member of Prime Minister and their predators. Well, I'd love you to go and take a sample size of some of the. Well, perhaps I misheard it. Perhaps I misheard it. But you would have to say that would be the insinuation of some. That because I have heard people say it was good result. We've got rid of 400 threats to children. Now, I wouldn't see it that way. I would think most reasonable people would think that's probably a bad outcome. That's a bit of overreach from a policy that is not fit for purpose. And I shared a story the last sitting week about Indigenous rangers. A bloke I sat next to on a plane. He said, "Mate, tell blue cards." I mean, I always get the same reaction, shaking your head like blue cards. Don't start me with that. 2 young blokes I got off the street working, but we had to get our fire safety certificate. Which meant they need a blue card. So these guys are working out in the remotest parts of Queensland in the bush, but they need a blue card. So guess what? They don't have a job now. They couldn't get the blue card. So congratulations. We're keeping kids safe by rangers, not getting their blue cards. These are the inadvertent effects that we're not addressing, and that's the real regret of what's happening here tonight. So we believe in trying to fix real problems and real solutions, not words, not nebulous-type concepts that are going to somehow get these people out of this situation and address those horrible statistics I gave you about Doomadgee. These are aspirational people, and they want a job, they want a house. There's a racial pay gap here, and again, Doomadgee, $63,000 average annual income. You try and live off that when you're paying $600 a week for your groceries, and then you try and get a job. No wonder they're angry. No wonder they're angry. No wonder their kids are angry and coming to Mount Isa and playing up, because they're angry because we're not backing them. And here's an opportunity to back them. Here's the mayors. Go and talk to every mayor. I challenge you, any one of you, go and ring a mayor anywhere through the Cape and the Gulf to argue with the concept here. And if you want to argue semantics, then put an amendment in. Or come back tomorrow, if you're the government, reintroduce it, suspend standing orders, bring something else back in that fixes this. I would love to support it. Couldn't care less if it's got KAP's name or anything. This is much greater than politics. I don't know if there should be too many other priorities we have in this state than in addressing those horrible things that these people are fixing, and they're getting angrier and angrier because we're not backing them. And we can all sit here and feel safe for ourselves and say, well, that's right, we've got some good, rigorous regime to protect kids. I'm not sure you're protecting the kids any better. Again, I will argue that if you can get mum and dad into work, you've got a much better chance of keeping those kids safe in Doomadgee. If you can get them into work and off the grog, off the drugs, you've got a much better chance. Much better chance than any blue card waving around the school or the hospital at the moment. Or, if I want to make light of it, waving around the sewage plant in Kowanyama, because the sewage plant operating in Kowanyama needed a blue card. That's really important. But, how is that? Where is the benefit? And perhaps there is some small marginal benefit at the moment with keeping it as it is in terms of child safety from application, from where the card will apply. But, I think that is well offset, and we are heavily discounting and ignoring the amazing benefit of empowering these people into the modern economy. That is such a big thing. So, in closing, I really ask people to consider how they vote on this, and it is a good opportunity. It's just going to keep coming back in the House if it's not done tonight. You're going to have to address this at some point because the problem's not going away. And tinkering around the edges, you can say whatever you want and talk your way through the media and say we've got this wonderful new policy that does it. But unless you're going to tackle this problem head on and address it warts and all with the risks that go along with it, unless you're willing to really back and live what you are saying about giving these people a voice, if you want a manifestation of that principle put into policy, I cannot see how you can vote against this. Otherwise, I fear you are deeply hypocritical. And with that, I respectfully put it to the House and ask you to support the bill.
Thank you, Member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. Those of that opinion say aye. Those against no. I think the noes have it. A division has been called. Ring the bells for 4 minutes.